In my heartfelt autobiography, I bare my soul with emotional honesty, with stories about affairs and anxieties, milestones and mistakes, and successes that made India proud. Stories of heart-wrenching setbacks, and how I survived the roller coaster journey by making, breaking, and remaking as a man. Stories I Must Tell is an emotional experience. I'm pretty sure you'll enjoy Stories I Must Tell, the emotional journey of an actor.
Good afternoon, Your Highnesses, Excellencies and Dignitaries, members of the ABLF network, and all of our wonderful guests here with us today. My name is Resham Katecha. I'm a policy and strategy specialist, and as ever, I am delighted to be here at the ABLF. The man I'm about to interview needs no introduction, but I'm going to give him one anyway. Kabir Bedi was the original crossover Indian star who started out in Hindi movies, worked in Hollywood, and went on to become a star in Europe. His trailblazing career spans Bollywood, Hollywood, and in fact, he's known worldwide. He's most famous for his role as the villain in the James Bond movie Octopussy, but is also hugely famous for his star turn in The Bold and the Beautiful, one of the world's most watched TV shows. He adds another feather in his cap. He's just become a debut author with his best-selling autobiography, Stories I Must Tell, which talks about his life and its unusually candid and compelling story of a middle-class boy from Delhi whose career took him around the globe and to world fame. So Kabir, thank you so much for being with us today and for sharing your life story and your autobiography.
Thank you, Resham, for that wonderful introduction. And I thank the ABLF platform and all people connected with organizing it for inviting me on to be here. It's wonderful to be able to talk about my book and to be talking to you.
Thank you so much, Kabir. So you were the original crossover actor. You broke the glass ceiling for many Bollywood stars after you to follow your steps into Hollywood. And you broke that ceiling with your infamous role in the Bond movie Octopussy. So tell us, what was it like breaking into Bollywood, from Bollywood into Hollywood?
It was quite a journey. I mean, my whole life has been quite an eventful journey in so many ways, getting from Delhi to Mumbai, Bollywood, Europe, and Hollywood. It's hard to sum it up in a few lines because I've written about it in my book, and many things and events and dramas and happenings took me through tremendous triumphs and some tragedies as well along the way from Bollywood to Hollywood. But essentially, what opened the door for me after my career in Bollywood was my enormous success in Europe. The Sandokan series was really seen by every home in Europe, and particularly in Italy, who were the producers of the film, of the series. It became something quite iconic as a character that has remained in the Italian consciousness even to today, and has built a lifelong relationship with the Italians. But to answer your question, it was enormously euphoric to find that kind of stardom in Europe, and it opened the doors for Hollywood for me. When I went to Hollywood, the hardest part was that they weren't writing roles for Asian actors at all, or for Indian actors. And I really had to go to my agent and say, listen, they're not writing roles for me, so please think of me as a foreigner. Because Hollywood was such an insular town in those days that anything foreign meant any foreigner could play it. It was literally that kind of attitude. So I ended up, my very first film in Hollywood was The Thief of Baghdad, where I played the prince. And that was not an Indian role, but it was a Middle Eastern role. I also played a huge role in The Bold and the Beautiful, where I played a Moroccan prince. The only time I was actually cast correctly was in the James Bond film, where I played the villain, and I was playing an Indian character and an Indian Sikh character, which is my background as well. Otherwise, I've always had to play things that were different to me by being the eternal foreigner and making a career in Hollywood. And it was very hard then. It is easier now because diversity is an issue. Casting and writing roles for different ethnicities is important and has become policy, but it's still not an easy business. I mean, this business, climbing the road to stardom, is a very slippery slope. And it would be extremely silly for anyone to assume that just because there more roles are being written for Asian actors that it's easy to break into Hollywood. No film industry is easy to break into. No film industry is easy to survive. And I always say that anyone who survives 25 years in this business deserves an Oscar for survival.
Well, I'm not sure Hollywood will take up that suggestion, but it is very magnanimous of you to recognize the challenge even for actors today. And so you've spoken just now and in the book about the fact you had to go for ethnically ambiguous roles, although it is interesting to me that you've been chosen to play royalty so many times, clearly something about you that screams royalty. Do you find that challenging emotionally, having to identify as kind of ethnically ambiguous?
No, I don't find that challenging at all. I mean, that's what an actor does. If the role is good, if the character is a powerful one, you play him with all the power you have, and hopefully that communicates to the audience. Speaking of me playing emperors, you know, I've played the Emperor Shah Jahan, the builder of the Taj Mahal, twice. I played him in Akbar Khan's film, Taj Mahal, An Eternal Love Story. And I also played him on stage at the Illuminato Theatre Festival in Toronto with a wonderful play written by John Murrell, one of Canada's most decorated playwrights. And it was a spectacular production with me on screen virtually for 90 minutes and everything changing around me with laser projections and dancers coming on and me talking of Mughal history and personal tragedies and soliloquies and dramatic scenes. You know, playing royalty is something I've done a lot. So I don't know, maybe people think because of my look and size, I'm more suited to those roles, but I'm very glad I played them. Even the Sandokan role that made me a huge star in Europe, Sandokan was a prince who then became a revolutionary to fight the British colonialists occupying his country. But then again, he was a prince who became a revolutionary. So that is a running theme that you've actually picked up on.
Yes. So
it's not a challenge to play different characters. It isn't a challenge to play different characters. And I have played many characters in many nationalities of varying ages because my career has spanned over 50 years since I began it.
So I want to stick to the theme of royalty. You do speak in your book very early on, the initial story is about how you got your interview with the Beatles and what that experience was like. And I can only imagine to a young university graduate what that felt like. Tell us a little bit about that, because actually throughout your career, you've really seized opportunity. It's not things that have fallen in your lap. You've gone out there and taken on the challenges. How do you identify the opportunities? How do you seize them? And how do you feel about that?
The interview with the Beatles was certainly one of the turning points of my life. I was a cub reporter with All India Radio. I went out to interview the Beatles. The whole day press corps was trying to get through. They were looking for the Beatles. I, being an avid Beatle fan, knew I had to find the manager, Brian Epstein. I found him and I pressured him, because how I pressured him, I'll tell you in the book. But I pressured him into thinking that if he didn't do the interview, the government of India would get very angry. And he eventually gave me that interview. And it was wonderful being in the room with the Beatles, because they were not just tremendous musicians of whom I was a fan. They represented the 60s, which was the most exciting decade of the last century, according to me. It was a time of immense social change, of the whole counterculture movement, hippies, psychedelic clothes, the pill had been invented, giving people sexual freedom. there was rebellion in the air. There was people who wanted to change the old order that they'd grown up into. It was a seminal generation in terms of the changes that it created in the society in the West. And that also affected us greatly here. So to be in the same room with the Beatles was like Alice in Wonderland. It was like having died and gone to heaven. But that became a crisis for me, because the way All India Radio treated that interview, again, I get into great detail in my book about the drama that followed, made me realize I didn't want to work with those people, and I needed to find a whole new direction in my life. And you're right, crisis always is hard at the time, but there's always a silver lining. There's always an opportunity. There's always another door that opens if you open your mind to it. Instead of wallowing in the present, think of the future, think of the possibilities. And I did that. I went through what I could do in life and decided I'm going to find a career in film. And I set off from Delhi to Mumbai with 700 rupees in my pocket, because that is the kind of daring and spirit you have when you're young. You believe you can conquer the world with nothing in your pocket except your spirit and your talent and your willingness to do whatever it takes to get there. And then, of course, I had my career in advertising, then in theatre, then Bollywood, and many wonderful incidents and events along the way that I think, from a point of view, just knowing the history of the times and then the stories about the people that made those times makes my book particularly relevant today, because people need to know what it was like to live in the 60s and 70s in India, and I've talked about 80s and 90s in Hollywood.
I think what you say there.
The year 2000 is a totally international career. Sorry?
Sorry, I was just going to say that I think actually what you say is so fascinating and so relevant to the book that actually, it's not just a book that outlines the highs of your life. It's not just about an interview with the Beatles. It's about, how you were treated by the radio, how that interview was treated. And actually, it is really inspiring to know that actually there's good and bad, and that you can make the most of it. And I want to pick up on that, because you are brutally honest in your book about the highs and the lows of your life, as well as the good things you did and the things maybe you think you could have done differently. Was there anything you felt uncomfortable including in the book, and how did you decide which stories should go in there? After decades of brilliant career, you must have been spoilt for choice.
Well, it's, Resham, I spent many, I'd say, decades thinking about my book, but never writing it. And in the last decade, I sort of made various attempts to write it. Eventually, I figured out how I was going to tell my story. And once I was clear on how, then I was also very clear that what I said had to be authentic. It had to resonate. It had to, I wasn't going to sugarcoat it or tell it through rose-tinted glasses. I was going to talk about my own feelings as well as the feelings of others. And the only way I could talk about others, the joys of others, was also the faults of others, is to talk about my own faults and my own mistakes. Mm-hmm. And I've owned up. And I think the reason people read autobiographies is not just to say, let's find out about how fantastic a life Kabir Bedi has had. It's to say, what do I learn from this book? What do I learn of the times, of the people, of the incidents, of cinema? And what do I learn in terms of mistakes that he made that I can avoid? And that's why I shared this, because I think it's important that people get from this book things that are relevant and important to their lives. Because I don't want them to make the mistakes that I made. And I made some pretty fundamental mistakes. I mean, just to give you a glimpse from going from this extraordinary stardom I had in Europe, there was a time towards the end of my career in Hollywood when I actually had to file for bankruptcy, and how I rebuilt from that, and how you overcome adversity. And all those things, I've said it like it was, and I said, let the chips fall where they may. That's life. That's my story.
And in terms of what people can identify with, actually, I think a lot of people will identify with the relationship you have with had with your parents and your family and the influence they had on your life. So your late mother, a Tibetan Buddhist monk, your father, an author and philosopher who's a descendant of Guru Nanak, and of course, your ancestors devoted to Indian independence. How do you think that shaped your character and your ambitions?
I think it shaped me in very fundamental ways because my parents, everyone's parents, are a huge influence on them. And my parents were remarkable in that my mother was English, my father was Indian, they met at Oxford, they came to India. Both of them joined the Indian freedom struggle. My father was a flaming communist, my mother was Gandhian. It was an incredible relationship, and there's 3 books that have been written on my mother alone. So I won't get into the details of that, but just to say that from my father's side, I got the Sikh tradition, of the tradition of the Sikhs and Guru Nanak. From my mother's side, I got the Buddhist tradition. Both of them together with my own questioning mind, opened my mind to what is the truth. Different religions say different things. All religions give people great human values to live by. But philosophically, they're saying different things. So how does one find the truth in all this? And my own philosophical quest, and the people that I met along that quest, and what shaped me, what influenced me, the beliefs that have resonated for me, all that I share in my book. Because I think that also is a question that people often ask. See, religion is a wonderful thing because it brings a sense of order to people's lives. It gives them a sense of community. It gives them the rights of birth and marriage and death, etc. So I never run down religion. I see it's an immense role. But then there's the questioners and seekers like me that want to know a little more, that want to probe a little more, and say, let's find out philosophically what's happening. And that journey also I've shared in my book, and I think it's one of the most interesting chapters that I've written, including the conclusions I've come to, which you may like to know through my book.
Definitely, and as you say, they are weaved throughout. There's a full chapter on it. And your book also, you talk very honestly about the challenges that came after each significant success. So, globally recognized achievements like Sandokan, Octopussy, The Bold and the Beautiful, and of course, Khoon Bari Mang. But for you, what was your I've made it moment?
It has to be the success of Sandokan, because even though I had a few big successes before I left Bollywood for Europe, that kind of stardom is this kind of things that actors dream of but very rarely achieve. So when we were in Rome, because I went with Parveen Babi, who I was together with at the time, and we celebrated the extraordinary success of Sandokan being on every television show, on every magazine cover, on every newspaper interview, every radio show. It was that kind of madness. What I associated with the Beatles was happening to me. So that must have been the I made it moment. And I remember one moment in particular when Parveen and I looked out from the Hotel Excelsior where we were staying on Via Veneto, across the road to the newsstand, and every photograph on every magazine was a picture of us on the cover. That was I've made it moment.
There's also, relating to that fascinating anecdote you share about having to evacuate a building because of the health and safety system, not let that. So I would recommend people read that. But of course, you've had a successful career.
We have to clarify this, that I had to evacuate the building because there were so many fans in it that the manager insisted I leave, otherwise the building would collapse. So yes, there were those highs too.
Nothing Kabir had done wrong other than being too attractive to his many, many fans wanting to see him. And of course, you've had a successful career over decades. How have you found Bollywood has changed over the time since you started? And did you find it difficult coming back to Bollywood and adapting to that way of working after many years in Europe?
The whole film industry has changed, both in Bollywood and in Hollywood. Certainly the amounts paid to actors have gone up by a factor of 100. What's changed substantially is also the nature of the mediums. When I began, cinema was the predominant way that films got seen. Then suddenly it went on to television. Then it went on to DVDs. Then it went on. Then came the age of syndication. Now you are in the world of the internet as well as the OTT platforms. And I think the most exciting changes happening today is what's happening in the world of the streaming OTT platforms like Netflix and Amazon, Hotstar, Disney, etc. Because this is a strange hybrid of film and television coming together, giving you both the short form and the long form together, and not being constrained by the usual rules of the game, giving you programs that are far more creative, far more daring, far more pushing the envelope in terms of themes and subjects. So it has employed a whole generation of people that would not have got work in the traditional film industry. And many filmmakers that were finding it hard to finance their films today have become the stars of OTT streaming platforms. So a huge change in those terms. And it wasn't a big problem for me coming back to Bollywood because, you know, Bollywood launched me. I have to thank Bollywood firstly for launching me. They're the ones that made me a professional actor, which is why I was in the running even to be considered when the Italians came into town looking to find the right actors for the role. Bollywood has always been there for me. My biggest film, Khoon Bhari Maan, actually happened in the middle of my American years. I was shooting a television series called Magnum PI with Tom Selleck in Hawaii. And I was sitting in my hotel room in Honolulu, looking at the golden sun falling on the sea, and the phone rings in my room, and I pick it up, and it's Rakesh Roshan, this Indian director who I knew from a long time ago, who said, "I've got this film to offer you. I want you to be the leading man." I said, "Great, but why me in Honolulu? Why isn't the Bollywood actors on strike?" He said, No. In my film, the hero becomes a villain. No hero will do it. And I can't put a villain in the film. There'd be no surprise. You're the perfect guy for it. So that film actually happened in the middle of my Hollywood years. And since coming back from Hollywood, which is the early part of this, about, say, 20 years ago, it's about 15 years ago, there's been a lot of films that I've done. I've done films with some of the biggest Bollywood superstars, with 2 films with Hrithik Roshan, 2 films with Shah Rukh Khan, 1 film with Akshay Kumar. So Bollywood has always been there. And I've been out of India for 30 years of my life, so that I couldn't have done any more films for Bollywood. But I'm being here now. I certainly look forward to doing more films with them, also on the OTT platforms. But times change and you adapt. This is the lesson of what we're living through right now.
And what advice would you give? You've obviously conquered not only Bollywood, but Hollywood and Europe as well. What advice would you give to aspiring actors around how to make a success of themselves, how to select agents, how to try and become the next you?
Well, thank you for that. But really speaking, if you want to get into acting, do it because you love the craft. If you love the craft, then you'll be happy whether you're doing theater, a soap opera, or you're doing film. Whether you're famous or not, you'll be doing something you love. If you're doing it just for fame and glory, you will have a much tougher time because it's a far more slippery slope to climb. Excuse me. And it's not an easy industry. So I would be very careful if you entered the industry for the wrong reasons. Do it for the right reasons because you love the craft. But also, today we all have to adapt to a whole new world in this pandemic, which is creating a whole new paradigm of people having to work in different situations. We may have to be doing a lot more blue screen work, where you film against blue screens, but you can be put in any location because traveling is difficult. Locations are not easy. Many new situations have arisen. And as Charles Darwin said, we all have to adapt. The species that survives is not always the strongest or even the most intelligent. It is the species that learns to adapt. And all of us are having to learn to adapt to a whole new world that has emerged. And this is true of the acting world as well.
And so I want to come back to your book. So the stories, you've said the stories you must tell. What was there a short list or a backup list of stories that almost made it into the book but didn't? And if so, what's your favorite one?
You know, there are many stories that I have to tell. And the reason I took so long to write the book was because I didn't know how to sort of fit them into one narrative. When I figured out how I was going to tell this all the stories I wanted to tell or needed to tell, then I wrote it in an absolute blaze of passion and sat down and just hammered it out many hours a day. And I used the pandemic to write this book. It's been written in the pandemic, released in the pandemic, and being read in the pandemic. Has become a bestseller in the pandemic. But the stories that I enjoyed the most writing was the story of my parents, because it is truly an extraordinary set of human beings doing amazing things, and what their influence on my life was, and what it was like to be their child. The most painful story was the story of my son and the battle with his mental problems and what a father goes through in those situations. The emotional stories of my relationship with Pratima and with Praveen also are there, because we went through a lot together, and there were a lot of very deeply human emotional dramas and situations and conflicts that I have shared, because for all the love that we shared, in the end, it was lost. So all the stories have a resonance of their own, starting with the Beatles and ending with my return to India, in fact, being knighted by the Italians for my lifelong relationship with them. But if you ask me my favorite, it's my parents' chapter. And it's my homage to them too.
Well, how wonderful. And as you say throughout the book, it's incredible how clear it is that, you know, the deep emotions that you hold as a person in your human connections really shines through. So I'm going to be cheeky because we've got 1 minute left. And I just wanted to ask, what next for Kabir Bedi?
There'll be more books, there'll be more films, and I hope you see a lot more of me, even at the ABLF, in whatever capacity it happens. But I certainly look forward to writing a lot more.
Fantastic. Good news for us all. Lots more to read and watch. So Kabir Bedi, thank you so much for giving us so much pleasure on our TV screens and in cinemas. Thank you for giving us something to read, and thank you for your time today. To our audience, if you've got thoughts, comments, questions, please do post them on our social media live wall with the hashtag ABLF City. And remember that if you did miss a part of Kabir's session, or any other session, you can come back here later today and watch it on demand anytime. So thank you so much to everybody for joining us today. Remember that we are back every month featuring global leaders in powerful conversations.
Thank you, Resham. Thank you so much.